Nature. It provides us with so much.
Tranquility, clean air and fresh water,
protection from disease and natural disasters.
But we live at a time when our actions have made Earth's ecosystems more damaged and degraded than ever before.
Today, we have an opportunity we must not squander.
Evidence from science and practice show that nature-based solutions can help tackle this crisis on a global scale.
Whilst financial backing and political ambition have never been greater.
From commitments to decarbonize economies
to restoring global ecosystems.
We will need a multifaceted approach to turn the tide on climate change, halt biodiversity loss, and regenerate our Earth.
That's why leaders across science, conservation, restoration, development, sustainability, and business collectively support 4 principles for nature-based solutions.
Cut emissions.
Conserve and protect existing ecosystems.
Be socially responsible.
Be ecologically responsible.
Nature-based solutions are powerful tools to help slow climate change and protect us from its impacts.
But they are not a substitute for cutting greenhouse gas emissions or for protecting existing ecosystems.
They must be implemented responsibly with Indigenous peoples and local communities,
and based on rigorous ecological principles.
With greater understanding and resources at our disposal than ever before,
this is an exciting time to take responsibility.
By channeling this guiding principle into holistic actions
and seizing the momentum, we can harness this opportunity.
We can create a better world.
We can come together with nature.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. I don't know if you all heard the sound from the video. I did not until the last 3 seconds. So yes, some did hear the video, or nobody heard the video. Nobody heard it. Okay. Well, let's start in, and maybe we have a few minutes left at the end to rerun the video, because it's quite an amazing production and we wouldn't want to completely lose it. But let's start in so that we are respectful of the audience that is spread around the world. Thank you to everyone for joining us. This is a session on Together with Nature that seeks to be an input to so many conversations that are underway in so many different spaces and geographies about what is the important role that nature is already playing, has already played, and will continue to play, especially if we intentionally regenerate nature, the role that nature can play in addressing the climate crisis. I have a fantastic group of panelists with me who I will introduce only very, very briefly. I am joined today by Professor Johan Rockstrom, the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, Dr. Mampela Rampelli, activist, medical doctor, academic and co-president of the Club of Rome, Paul Dickinson, executive chair of CDP, Professor Tom Crowther from Crowther Lab, Kara Hurst, VP of Sustainability at Amazon, Maria Mendeluce, CEO of We Mean Business, Johan Lambert, Executive VP of MasterCard, Stuart Maginis, Global Director of Nature-Based Solutions Group at IUCN, and our one and only Sandrine Dixon, from whom we've just heard a wonderful call to action. We will be discussing nature-based solutions from many different perspectives, but I just wanted to put a quick context around them, because we tend to think first that nature is over here and energy is over there, as though they were separable in terms of answering the crisis of climate change and trying to address the emergency that we're in. And in fact, these two things go hand in hand. We should remember, first of all, that nature-based solutions, everything that has to do with restoration of soils, reforestation, protection of existing and standing forests, the whole family, which is a huge family of nature-based solutions, stand on their own in terms of their value to the total ecosystem around the world, but also to us humans, because they help to protect the aquifers from which we get the water that we drink. They help to produce the air that we breathe, and certainly the food that we eat. So in and of themselves, we should be, and I think in a post-COVID crisis, we're learning so much more about how nature is important to human life. On top of that, on top of the fact that they stand on their own and are such valuable and absolutely critical resources to our human life and our human existence and survival, they also help us with climate change because of the absorption of CO2. So we will be discussing today how these two things interact with each other, how they are completely complementary, and how we can see them as being the perfect complement for the quality of life that we want to have on this planet. We have been fully aware that there are hundreds of people, experts, institutions that have been working on how do you implement nature-based solutions in a responsible way? Because just like everything else in life, if you do it irresponsibly, it's not helpful. And so in order to have some clarity and some guidance on this, we have invited everyone who has been working on these and finally ended up with 70 plus institutions and experts who together came to tease out of the vast work that they are still continuing to do, which may be very site specific, maybe ecosystem specific, but to tweeze out of that 4 main principles that need to accompany any nature-based solutions practices in order to make them responsible and in order to ensure that they are having the positive impact that we need them to have. And the 4 principles can be searched on our new website that I will give you also at the end. But basically, can I just summarize those 4 principles by 1, cutting emissions. Number 2, conserve and protect existing ecosystems. This is not about cutting down standing forests, but conserve and protect the existing ecosystems. Be socially responsible with those people that live around there and depend on these ecosystems. And of course, be ecologically responsible. So more detail to be discussed by the fantastic panel that we have, but let's just remember that those principles need to be taken as a package. It's not a menu. It's not, I'm going to choose 1 and 3, but forget about 2 and 4, or I'm going to choose 3 and 4 and forget 1 and 2. They actually come as a package. And if you want to invest in nature-based solutions in a responsible way, you actually do need to commit to all 4 principles as a package. So with that, I would like to invite our first panelist. And not surprisingly, as we have learned in COVID, but as we know in climate, we start with science. Any policy, any action that is not science-based is not going to be helpful, simple as that. So today we also want to be start with that rigor and start with science. And I would like to invite Johan Rockstrom to talk to us a little bit about the natural systems and their relationship, how we have perhaps protected but not enough and destroyed some natural ecosystems, how we have gone beyond planetary boundaries. And in particular, Johan, I would love you to go into what has been the impact on our economic and social development? What are the consequences that we're already seeing of the negative impact that we have had on our ecosystems? Hopefully Johan is there. Johan,
you can hear me?
I think yes.
Oh,
yes,
now
unmuted.
I'm unmuted. Yeah, there is a host keeping it very militant. Very good. Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Christiana. I'll be building scientifically on your intro and also kind of trying to expand it slightly further, even in terms of the systems requirement to really enable this transition towards nature-based solutions for an equitable and prosperous future. I think the first conclusion, which will be almost a repetition to this group, is the recognition that the pandemic, the corona crisis, is an interlinked crisis with our climate crisis and the ecological crisis we're facing. We have, already 6 months before the pandemic is the point when science came together and published a Nature article that gave the justification for declaring a state of planetary emergency. This was coupled very closely with the whole Lancet Commission on Planetary Health, which was the scientific community from the health side coming together, making clear that the stability of the planet is tightly coupled to the health of people. Now, the connections here are, of course, in this case, very particular, given that we have evidence that the COVID-19 or the SARS-CoV-2 virus is closely linked to the fact that we have virus spillovers from wildlife through domestic animals to humans related to our unsustainable expansion of agriculture, deforestation, wildlife trade, interconnected in a globalized world. So the links here, if you want to build really have a resilient recovery after COVID, one of the major investments is to preserve nature, to preserve the ecological functions in the roughly 50% of remaining terrestrial ecosystems that are still in a reasonably natural state, and that this is potentially the most valuable, economically and socially valuable investment we can make to enable a safe future for humanity. That's kind of one conclusion. But then let me just support you also, Christiana, in your kickoff here on nature-based solutions. This is one of the areas where there is zero scientific uncertainty that it works at really big scale. Now, the proof of this is quite dramatic because it doesn't lie in what we are investing in today. It lies in our dependence for the whole modern civilization as we know it, because our planet has been drifting in and out of ice ages over the past 1 million years, roughly 100,000 years of ice age, and then shorter periods, 15 to 30,000 years of warm interglacials. We leave the last ice age 12,000 years ago, and of course it's kicked off, we know that, through the orbit that our planet has around the sun. So we come slightly closer to the sun, we start seeing ice melt, and we move out of the ice age. However, the orbit can only contribute with roughly 1 degree Celsius warming, and the remaining 3 degrees that lifts us out of an ice age, so -4 is a deep ice age. What lifts us out, 70 to 80% of that heavy lifting is through nature. It's actually nature that takes us out of ice age through the biosphere feedbacks, such as melting ice, such as photosynthesis, all the forests, all the biodiversity, our ocean mechanisms, and that stabilizes us to the planet that we know and that has enabled us to develop the civilizations as we depend to, and the civilizations that can deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. And now we are pushing ourselves out of that state. So we have the proof that nature is what keeps us stable. 80 to 80% of the heavy lifting that stabilizes Earth is provided by nature. And of course, our only chance to really deliver on Paris and the SDGs is to continue working with nature, not against nature, to be able to stabilize and avoid crossing tipping points in the future. Now, just prior to the pandemic, just to close here, we had the devastating, unprecedented forest fires in Australia. It's almost like we've forgotten about these. That was a proof of an extreme event amplified by human global warming. Then we had the pandemic. And following the pandemic, we are now observing freak heat waves in Siberia. 38 degrees Celsius warming temperature observed, which has accelerated permafrost thawing at a pace that really makes science very nervous, because we cannot see indications of big tipping points yet on permafrost thawing. But what's happening right now, as we speak, in the Arctic is unprecedented in terms of heat. So, of course, there's so much scientific support today for a very rapid emergency transition where we need to work with nature-based solutions as a key component of decarbonizing the global energy system. So, overall, a very strong scientific support for the agenda of today's conversation. Back to you, Christiana.
Thank you, Johan. Thank you. And, you know, as you were reminding us of these temperatures in Siberia, I just got this visual image of every time you go into a public space now, you have a thermometer pointed at your forehead in order to know whether you have abnormally high temperatures. And that discipline is a discipline that we're not having about the planetary temperatures. If we took that temperature every day, and I know that you do, but be much more aware of that, we would hopefully be making better decisions. But yes, while we have been focused on COVID, climate change has continued to ravage so many different geographies. So we need to understand that these crises converge, and we have to make the solutions converge, because we can't afford to address one crisis and then the next one sequentially, but rather converge them. With that, let me turn to Stuart. And Stuart, we were so delighted to work with IUCN because when we launched these 4 principles in public, because frankly, Stuart, IUCN had launched the definition of nature-based solutions way back in 2016. So to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. And we understand that you'll be launching a new standard at the end of July, I think on the 23rd. And we were just so delighted to work hand in hand with you about these principles, the 4 principles, but would love you to give a broader context of where this came from in 2016, the definition, how you see the standard that you're launching on the 23rd of July, how you see that as overlapping or giving much more depth to the principles that are admittedly very shortly expressed just for general consumption, and how you see us working hand in hand once your standards are out and published. Stuart?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Christiana, and thanks to the organisers for the opportunity to speak to everyone this afternoon. I think I'll just hop straight into your question. Nature-based solutions, at least in the current manifestation, and I think that Johan highlighted that realization of just the linkage between human dependency and ecosystem health. It's been around for centuries, but in the current manifestation, it's been around for a couple of decades, really since the late 1990s. And me and my team and many others have been working on how you can actually build these in to address issues in landscape restoration, disaster risk reduction, etc. Now, however, as you rightfully noted, it's really only over the last few years that we've seen nature-based solutions come to this much broader public prominence. And while that widespread recognition and recent interest is really welcome, obviously we want to see that build, it also does present a risk. It presents a risk that nature-based solutions are perhaps misunderstood, misinterpreted, and that in turn could present a risk that they are misapplied, either intentionally or purposefully. And so really, to counteract this risk of a sort of a misunderstanding of what nature-based solutions are and a misapplication of them, and therefore losing the sort of potential that Johan just referred to. IUCN, in fact, the global conservation community is represented by IUCN's 1,400 state government agency, indigenous peoples, and NGO members, adopted a single definition along with 8 definitional principles. I will note by unanimous decision in 2016, that was at our World Conservation Congress in Hawaii. And that definition frames MBS as actions to protect, sustainably manage and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. Now, there's 2 key elements, and there's a lot of work and a lot of science that's been behind that and behind the definitional principles. But there's 2 key elements I want to highlight here. The first, that nature-based solutions are rooted in functioning ecosystems. And the second point is that ecosystems should be managed in a way to simultaneously deliver against addressing a societal challenge and delivering biodiversity benefits. So the implications of this, that technologies, for example, that derive energy from nature, let's say, for example, photovoltaic panels, or technologies that are inspired by nature, for example, a range of biomimicry, while those are worthy in their own right and we want to encourage them, they're not nature-based solutions, because nature-based solutions need a functioning ecosystem behind it. Equally, nature-based solutions have to be problem and solution-oriented, and that also means, for those of us in the conservation community, that not every single conservation action is necessarily a nature-based solution. Now, IUCN considers this clarity of definition, and by extension, this clarity of purpose as a first key step in making sure that nature-based solutions are effectively deployed and that they're not co-opted through misleading claims or greenwashing. And it was for this reason that we very enthusiastically worked with yourself and Tom and many others in drafting the Together with Nature statement. And to come to your question, we see the relationship between the statement and IUCN's earlier work on the definition as follows. The definition and definitional principles circumscribe what nature-based solutions are, and the 4 Together with Nature principles frames how nature-based solutions should be approached. However, that by itself is not enough to get nature-based solutions at scale on the ground, and particularly when we consider that to meet this ambition, we are really going to have to see the private sector and government mobilized at scale. And one question we've been faced with by many of our private sector partner collaborators is, tell us what are the key parameters required to successfully get nature-based solutions on the ground and effectively contributing to societal challenges. And this is where the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions comes in. This standard consists of 8 criteria and associated indicators that were agreed upon over a 2-year process that enlisted inputs from over 800 experts and practitioners drawn from 100 countries. And also included some bespoke consultations with key stakeholder groups, such as indigenous peoples and the private sector. The standard is designed purposefully as a facilitative framework to guide practitioners' understanding as to whether the measures they have in place for a prospective nature-based solution intervention are strong, or are they simply adequate, or are they partial, or are they insufficient. And the aim at this stage is not to set a rigid yes and no threshold, but rather to help guide those who would like to undertake a nature-based solution to understand and also take clear and corrective action to improve the quality of their nature-based solution. Very quickly, the key parameters covered by the standard include clarity of purpose with respect to the societal challenge being addressed, how to work with design at scale, delivering tangible biodiversity benefits, ensuring economic viability, addressing issues of inclusion and inclusive governance, framing how trade-offs should be approached, embedding adaptive management and learning into the nature-based solution, and finally, attending to longer-term sustainability and mainstreaming needs of the intervention. So even before the launch, which is happening on the 23rd of July, there's been a lot of positive engagement with both companies and the private sector. And we're working with several companies at the minute to test the application of the standard, including 2 investment funds that we hope will be launched sometime next year and could have a combined capitalized value of around $900 million US. And nature-based solutions would be part and parcel of what they would be delivering. In conclusion, I think the interest in nature-based solutions was already established before the COVID-19 pandemic, but even more so now, it is more relevant. It is even better positioned to be a central plank of society's broader desire, and we've heard this already, to build back better, not to return to the past, but to move forward positively. And so I think one final thing I'd just like to leave with the audience, it's important to remember that the application is not just in terms of addressing climate change and addressing the climate change crisis. While that's important, nature-based solutions can also be applied to food and water security, land degradation, disaster preparedness and risk reduction, and also local economic development, including, and this keeps coming up, local job creation. So just in conclusion, and just to wrap up these linkages, I think there is critical momentum building in the same direction. And I see a real complementarity now between the IUCN definition and definitional principles. They circumscribe what MBS is. The Together for Nature principles, which say how nature-based solution should be approached, and then the MBS standard, which frames what is required to get stuff happening on the ground. Thank you, Christiana.
Thank you, Stuart. I would agree that it does seem like all of these efforts are now really coming together in a very coherent way and really attracting a lot of public attention and certainly corporate attention. But before we get to the corporates, I wanted to invite Tom Crowther to tell us about the Trillion Trees story. Because it is a wonderful story, yet one more manifestation of what Stuart has just said, that the time has come for these actions. So Tom, can you quickly walk us through a Trillion Trees?
Brilliant, thanks Christiana. Yeah, I guess the sort of history of the Trillion Trees is a pretty simple one actually. Everybody on this call knows the value of nature and the power of nature to support humans. And we've all been aware of the incredible power of these trees to capture carbon from the atmosphere and then store that carbon for a long time in the soil. And I was actually studying soil organisms a few years ago when I was increasingly engaged in this conversation. And I think there was a lot of people that wanted to get engaged. And the challenge for many of them was we knew that trees and ecosystem restoration was a piece of the climate change puzzle, but we just didn't know how big that piece was because we didn't really fully understand the scale of the system. And it was at that time we decided to start building a network of forest ecologists all across the globe so that we could start to sort of build this global perspective to see what's the scale of the system we're working with and what's the scale of the problem and what's the scale of the possible solution. So by building this huge network of ecologists all over the world, we were a few years ago able to establish that we were able to map the world's forests for the very first time, showing that there's about 3 trillion trees on the planet now. And at that point, that was the sort of awakening of a lot of conversations around trillion trees. I think there was, at that point, the UN launched their Trillion Trees initiative. But then it was only last year that we actually continued this modeling process to model not just where trees are now, but where they can potentially exist on the planet. Because obviously we need a lot of land for urbanization and agriculture, but we found that outside of those areas, there's room for just over 1 trillion trees in about 0.9 billion hectares of degraded land, which all suggests that there's this incredible opportunity for forest restoration and conservation. Conservation to limit future emissions, and then restoration and preserving those forests to actually draw down some of that excess carbon from the atmosphere. And we estimated that those restoring and rejuvenating trees could capture up to 20 to 30% of the excess carbon that's lingering in the atmosphere right now, which makes it an incredibly powerful contribution, to our climate change movement as one of the many solutions that we need. But of course, and when we launched this information, it was wonderful. Then suddenly there wasn't just 1 trillion trees movement. There was actually 3. WWF launched their fantastic initiative, and actually World Economic Forum decided to get on board in that movement and launch their trillion tree initiative, all under the umbrella of the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, which is such a inspiring sort of movement. But at the same time, there was, this explosion of interest in the media and projects dotting up all over the place. But at the same time, there's a lot of controversy in the scientific world, because many researchers are quite rightly concerned about some of the dangers and the sort of risks that Stuart mentioned earlier, the risks of greenwashing. So, the risks that trees might seem like an easy way out. Like you plant a tree in the White House lawn and all of a sudden you don't need to remove protection of environmental land, or you don't need to commit to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I think obviously that's where it's almost through this conversation about these risks and these limitations that this movement has actually gained so much momentum, because with every risk and every article and every study indicating those risks, we can build on those things to build a much more meaningful and responsible restoration movement. And I think that's sort of the place where the principles of responsible restoration came from. And I think those are the things that are going to guide this restoration movement towards being a really responsible and impactful thing, not just capturing loads of carbon by planting the fastest growing monocultures around the world, but restoring a truly diverse nature that restores not only the carbon in the soil, but also all of the other ecosystem services that humans and biodiversity need. And so that's what our research focuses on very heavily at this point now. We're having set these targets with our initial research. We now focus primarily on working with thousands of restoration projects around the world to try to provide them with the ecological information that they need to overcome some of their challenges. Information like which species exist in this region, which is the highest priority area to focus on, and can I monitor my trees to evaluate them being preserved or restored and see them growing in the ground. And that is a step that enables this restoration movement, but that also improves the visibility of those projects to funders and to the public, so that we can all get engaged by donating and supporting those restoration projects around the world. So I think, I just leave it with that those are the players that are really building up this bottom-up movement, and those are the people that will make the difference.
Thanks very much. I think we've heard from Johan, Stuart, and Tom basically what we need to do and how we need to do it. So now we move to those who are actually being engaged. And Cara, with that, can I turn to you? Because we have had what I would like to think of as a cascade of brilliant announcements from Amazon on the climate space recently over the past few months, but certainly very intensely over the past few weeks. Amazon has been one of the companies that has taken this challenge put out there by Johan, Stuart, and Tom quite seriously, and you're already engaged. So could you tell us what Amazon is already doing on this?
Well, thank you for the invitation and to join the conversation. I've already learned so much in this discussion. And one of the things I would echo is that science for us has been the focus of everything we do across our business to address the climate crisis. And that is really guided by our work with the Climate Pledge, which of course we've co-founded with Christiana and Tom and Outrage+Optimism, and now have been joined by a number of other companies in that, including Verizon, Infosys, Reckitt Benckiser, and now Oakview Group. So we're thrilled to be able to accelerate our progress and do everything we can utilizing the size and the scale of Amazon for good, which is how we intend to continue to address some of these larger scale needs. So the Climate Pledge, if you're not familiar with it, has us accelerating our progress to address net zero carbon by 2040. And it gives our company and signatories an opportunity to sort of pool our intelligence, our know-how, and look at how we can access technologies and solutions together to help the planet along with our businesses. So we have a very open invitation along those fronts, and would like to continue to build that community. So we have a number of things that support that. We've recently announced our Climate Pledge Fund, which will support developing technologies and services to decarbonize and to help all of these companies meet the goals of the pledge. And so this is a dedicated venture investment program with $2 billion in funding investing in these products and services to accelerate this transition to a low carbon economy. But of course, nature-based solutions for us have been a very important tool as well. They are part of one of the 3 things articulated in the pledge. First, of course, to measure and report on progress. Secondarily, to decarbonize. But thirdly, where you cannot get to zero through operational changes, to deploy nature-based solutions or natural climate solutions in that. We think and that there is a number of ways that we can look at that. So we don't think that there are reason to defer any of the ambitious cuts to carbon emissions, that nature-based solutions can sort of tremendously also benefit our efforts to address climate change, as has already been discussed here, in addition to biodiversity loss and generally improving human health and well-being. So we are really excited about this idea. And when we launched the pledge, we established what we call the Right Now Climate Fund. And of course, this is to address the moment that we're in, and we wanted to get started right now on these types of solutions and looking at that. We knew that in supporting these nature-based solutions, we wanted to take that immediate action to avoid carbon emissions, and we wanted a partner in some of that. So when we talk about nature-based solutions, we refer to conservation, to restoration, to improved land management actions that increase carbon storage or avoid greenhouse gas emissions in forests, wetlands, peatlands, grasslands across the globe. And we support them, as many of you have already articulated, in line with the nature-based solutions principles. So we support these both and types of solutions, driving these reductions across our business operations and supporting them in general in terms of what we believe they can do for the planet. So I will give you a little bit about maybe the partnership that we've created along those lines and some of the things that we've done already. We've been partnering with the Nature Conservancy to support programs that focus on natural climate solutions and nature-based solutions with first family forest owners. And we did this in one of the premier conservation landscapes in North America. So we worked with the scientists at TNC to identify a network of lands. And these are lands that were sort of disproportionately important for conserving biodiversity and mitigating climate change. It's a key network and allows nature to sort of move and adapt in response to the changing climate. It's a 179 million acre parcel. It sort of crosses Blue Ridge to Boreal, and it's the centerpiece of the network in the eastern United States, which really holds more than half of the area's carbon stocks. So with this, we were empowering some of the smaller landowners, family landowners, to participate in these nature-based solutions, and we hope to accelerate their ability to be a part of these carbon markets that are developing. We also, in this work, had an investment of about 3.5 million euros towards a project focused on urban greening in Germany. And this one had a specific focus on reducing the impact of cities and people resulting from climate change. So through these actions, introduction of urban biodiversity and tree planting, things like stormwater management, wetland restoration, our funding aims to reduce urban heat island effect and flooding and pollution while both engaging the community there. So we're looking at that as a project designed to identify potential sites for greening activities and implement site-specific projects with that kind of community participation. We hope that after that's in Berlin, the concept will be extended to some other cities in Germany. So these types of investments that we're doing through the Right Now Climate Fund and in support of the overall climate pledge are part of this $100 million we're investing in natural climate solutions. But they are also, I think, demonstrative of our kind of commitment to saying we want to get started now. We think we're in a moment right now that is incredibly important not to wait. We understand the complexities and have been participating in many good conversations like this one around what does this mean? How are we governing what kinds of standardization is necessary. And I was so happy to hear that work is underway, because it's certainly something that we as a corporation, calling on the scientific community, academic community, NGOs, leaders and others to help to define. We would like to see more information, more standardization, more conversation about how we can continue to invest in things we know are necessary for the planet. So given this moment I think that we're in, and listening to all of you today, and what we already know about the science, we're hoping that many more companies will come in and join us in the sort of very big ambition of the Climate Pledge and Together with Nature. And in doing so, sort of accelerate our progress very rapidly on achieving net zero carbon, but taking some of these solutions to scale, and really thinking about how to put our own scale as companies behind them, because we think that while we're figuring it out together, we don't want to wait. We don't have time to wait. So
thank you, Kara. So open invitation for other companies to join the Climate Pledge. And it's a great website that is easy to find. Folks, we are running exceedingly late. And one thing that COVID has taught us in the Zoom marathons is that everyone is incredibly punctual about these Zoom meetings. So I do apologize, but I'm going to have to ask Johan, Mampela, Maria, Paul, and Sandrine to actually cut what they wanted to say and say it much, much shorter in order to be able to hand over to the next session. And I do that with respect, with sorrow, but quite asking you to really collaborate here with us. Johan, could I quickly turn to you, because in addition to Amazon, MasterCard has also developed a perspective on nature-based solutions from a corporate point of view, and also activating individual customers. Can you quickly outline what MasterCard is doing?
Yep, and I will be brief, Christiana. Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for everybody here to actually put all this energy and passion into nature-based solutions and climate as a whole. So, I mean, obviously, as many of you said, a company looks at this and needs to start with looking at oneself, right? So obviously, one needs to cut emissions, avoid emissions, and first look at its own footprint, and that's kind of table stakes. But Kara and some of you already said it. If it doesn't scale, it doesn't matter. And therefore, we as MasterCard, who has, relatively speaking, a small carbon footprint, we're kind of thinking, all right, that's just not good enough. How can we unleash, let's say, our network to help this cause? And I'm here. I'm not the sustainability officer for MasterCard. I'm actually the head of digital solutions. And the reason for that is because we believe that these type of things needs to be in the fabric of our business. It cannot be a side project. It needs to be embedded in everything we do. And for us, that means essentially two things. I promise I'll be brief. The first thing is we actually reach close to 3 billion consumers out there. And a very large proportion of these consumers want to themselves make an impact. It's very pervasive right now. And through our solutions, we can do that in 3 ways. One, we can provide them with, we will provide them with visibility on their personal carbon footprint based on their spending. You fill up the car, that's 50 liters of petrol, that represent 110 kilograms of CO2. Consumers don't know that, but we can actually let them know. It's not just the price that matters, it's the carbon footprint. Secondly, we want to encourage them to make climate-friendly solutions and themselves to therefore reduce their emissions. But importantly, we want them to give them tools to easily and quickly offset or compensate for their footprint. And that point them to nature-based solutions, because not only, as Tom said very eloquently, it's a very effective way to compensate, it's also something that everybody likes. Everybody likes trees. Everybody gets it, much easier to comprehend for a consumer than other ways of compensating. And so we're actually funneling what is potentially 3 billion consumers towards that goal. And we're implementing it in the way that the team here mentioned around the principles. So that's kind of one area. The second area, which is related, is we work with about 23,000 banks, about 40 million businesses. Now, all of them are grappling with that climate crisis. All of them wonder, what can we do more? But it's scary for a company because of all the greenwashing issues and all the lack of knowledge within the boardroom around this. And so by creating this Crisis Planet Coalition, we call it, we're inviting those players to actually join us, to focus and bundle these collective resources into nature-based solutions, which are science-based, which are very vetted by very prominent players out there, so that we collectively do the right thing rather than having a fragmented and sometimes misguided initiative there. And so by embedding all this activity within our business and not as a side, I think we can make progress, and we can bring hopefully lots of like-minded partners along with us. So I'll keep it at that. Christiana, again, thanks for this initiatives and for all the work that everybody's doing.
Okay, thank you very much, Johan. I appreciate that. Mampela, if it's okay with you, I'm going to jump over you just 1 second. Go to Maria to just continue the conversation of private sector and Paul, and then come back to both Maria and Sandrine to close us out on the part of the Club of Rome. So with that, Maria, could I ask you to also say just a few minutes from the point of view of your new job. So exciting to have you. Please.
Thank you. So thanks a lot, and I'm very honored to be on this panel and talking about this fascinating topic. I'll try to be brief and not go too fast. So I'll try to make my points very clear. I have been working with companies more in the WBCSD, where I have been working for the past 12 years on natural climate solutions for the past 3 years. And so I have seen an unprecedented interest from the business community to invest in nature climate solutions. Why? Well, I think 900 companies have science-based targets. They want to reduce their emissions, but they think that by investing in nature, they can accelerate getting to net zero, being aligned with 1.5. This is an unprecedented opportunity to channel investments to the area. As you know, if companies that want to be net zero, they also need to deal with the Scope 3 emissions, which is quite complicated. So often companies are looking at natural climate solutions as a transitional measure, sometimes because the technology is not available, and also as a way to address the Scope 3 emissions that they cannot really address by themselves. So they're fully committed to decarbonization. They're fully committed to work with their supply chain on reducing emissions, and they want to have this race to zero and get there as soon as possible, and hence are looking at investing in natural climate solutions to accelerate that, as the previous speakers have said. Of course, NCS are simple solutions. Photosynthesis is the first ever solution on climate. Everybody understands it. It seems to me, and I've come more from business and from the energy world, that it's much more difficult today to plant a tree than to put a renewable energy, because we're asking them, that as you do these investments, you have to do so many things in additional that it's becoming a little bit complicated. And because there is so much noise around greenwashing, I think we risk of companies, deciding not to invest in nature, which would be really a bad business for nature and for the world, right? So we are fully aligned with the principles that Christiana and your team have put forward. Obviously, a business want to do want to behave and want to invest in the best way possible. So there is a group that got together at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and the World Economic Forum, and we created a Natural Climate Solutions Alliance. And in this alliance, we're working to develop solutions for companies to have credible supply and demand of natural climate solutions. And those solutions involve monitoring, addressing, looking at how the markets can unlock the capitalist lake at scale, ensuring that we have high quality carbon credits, etc. So I think we all, just to conclude, I'm going a bit fast, but I know that.
Thank you, appreciate it.
So if you look at the science, exponential roadmaps, I think Johan Rockstrom was one of the main contributors. We need to reduce by half emissions in the next decade. And 1/3 of those solutions come from natural climate solutions. This is 9 gigatons. So I think we need to work together to show business how they can scale this investment in a way that is protecting the ecosystem, biodiversity, etc., but in a way that also accelerates, the investment in nature, so that we can also reach the climate targets. So business needs standards and tools. We need to be careful not to scare them away. We need to bring them along the journey. And I think the world really needs investment in nature. So we have a great opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Appreciate that brevity. And Paul, I'm going to have to ask you also for brevity, but you have a privileged overview of what the private sector is doing, given the vast number of companies that report to CDP. From your overview, where do you see companies' interest migrating toward complementing what they're doing on energy side, also bringing in now nature-based solutions? What is your take as to what you're seeing?
Well, thank you, Christiana. So nice to be on this panel. Look, the revenues from Amazon actually are greater than the revenues of the government of Turkey or Austria or something. MasterCard have 766 million cards in circulation. I'd like us all to appreciate how the business community is a touch point and sort of directing most things that happen in the world. To your question, Christiana, 80% of what takes us in and out of an ice age is nature. That's where the heavy lifting happens. That's what we've been told. Business understands that. I mean, business has been, spending the last few hundred years looking at its profit and loss account and its balance sheet. Now it's starting to look very much at nature's profit and loss account and nature's balance sheet, because business appreciates, the chief executive of Gucci recently said that nature is king. Essentially, underneath all of our commerce is nature underpinning it. And in fact, there could be enormous commercial opportunities to use nature more effectively. I think that there's an enormous role for investment and acceleration in the kind of technologies that allow us to do monitoring, reporting, and verification around nature-based solutions. That will be a critical part of enabling this and unleashing the potential of business. But from our experience working with, we have 540 companies reporting to us on their drivers of deforestation. And fully 15% of them are already investing in nature-based solutions. So, you've got hundreds of very large companies doing that, led actually by companies in Asia. So I think it's interesting. We're not seeing this sort of kind of Western particular leadership, but actually a far broader comprehension of this. But I think, I would conclude simply by saying that the smartest businesses partnering with the smartest investors are convinced that they need to deliver a healthy and sustainable future. And we're starting to see consumer preference driven by the kind of incredible technology MasterCard we're talking about. We're starting to see a consumer preference in terms of how people are investing, creating a perfect storm where there are vast opportunities for companies that seize this, weave it into their product design and marketing, huge opportunities for investors who get ahead of the curve. And that's where the sort of call to action turns into an incredibly powerful business case.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Paul, that reminder of the call to action. And with that, I would like to hand over actually to Mampela and to Dream to bring this to a close on behalf of the Club of Rome. First to you, Mampela, because I'm hoping, and I think I can count on you to give a view on social responsibility, just in case we have forgotten that component, and then turn over to Sandrine to actually close us out with one of your fantastic calls to action. So Mampela, over to you.
Thank you very much, Christian. I'm just going to make 1, 2, 3 points. First point is, the COVID pandemic has reminded us to go back to basics, that we need to bring culture back to the center of what development is about, because it is out of that focus on culture that we can have truly embedded social responsibility. And this social responsibility needs to be based on values. And the ancient wisdom tells us that we are interconnected, interdependent, and we have to thrive in the context of knowing that I am because you are. And that brings us to the need at all times to celebrate humanity, because in doing so, we create abundance instead of scarcity. And the call here is for governments in their public responsible roles to be proper stewards of the common good, the public goods, by promoting and incentivizing only those investments from the public and the private sector that promote ecosystem resilience and sustainability. And I want to conclude with the reference to the importance of civil society in becoming a louder and louder conscience of the global community. And let me close off with Robin Wall-Kimmeren's quotation from her book, Gathering Moths. And she asked the question, what makes moths persist for 350 million years? The lessons are simple. It's about being small, of giving more than you take, of working with nature's laws, and sticking together. Thank you.
The wisdom of moths. Thank you, Mampela. That is absolutely beautiful. Please put in the chat the link to that, because I want to look it up, and I think many of our almost 300 listeners and participants will want to look that up. Thank you for sharing that. The wisdom of moths. I love it. Sandrine, we would like to hear from you what pieces here in this conversation are missing and still need to be added. To also ask you to take us out with a last call to action. Over to you.
Christiana, thank you. And I don't think I deserve the closing words. I think you should have given the closing words, but as we're short on time, I will. I think there's the wisdom of moths, and then I would say there's the wisdom of Christiana Figueres and the Paris Agreement. And let's bring both of those together, because I think they hold a place in many of our hearts. Because we have moved from just the Paris Agreement to now understanding that we need greater wisdom post the biodiversity crisis and now the COVID crisis. And that's why Mampela's words were so compelling. What I didn't hear in this conversation is some of the incredible solutions that we're starting to see, linking up to Paul's call for bringing the investment community and the business community together. I would link it up to governments that are actually doing the right thing. Those that came out of COVID the most resilient, predominantly led by women, were the ones actually that had started to put in well-being indicators, looked at externalities and natural capital as fundamental parts of their economies. They have come out more resilient, and they are continuing to build the systems shift that we need. So the way in which I would like to conclude is to call on all of you as you move through these different sessions, because we will have our next session with Nature for Climate, which Lucy Almond will lead, which will be looking at some of the new natural capital accounting and the work that Vivid Economics has done. But also think about right now in Europe, we've got green recovery programs. In Korea and other places, we start to have, even in Costa Rica, if you look at the way in which they're looking at well-being economics, Christiana, and in New Zealand and in Iceland and in Scotland, we now have these governments that are starting to do exactly what we've just asked them to do, which is to put people, planet, and prosperity at the core of their economies. So I would ask you all to come together around these shifts, to start really speaking to those new indicators that we're seeing, We're speaking to the new recovery mechanisms that we're actually seeing and hold governments accountable, not only those that are moving forward, but those that haven't yet, because business as usual is not an option. Ubuntu is definitely the option, Mampela. Ubuntu is the option, and it's what was discussed in the previous panel, which is we absolutely need to remember that we're a very small part of the universe, we as human beings. Nature is who we are, and that is fundamental. So as we move into the next session, let's remember that nature is who we are, and that as we try to learn the wisdom of the moths, let's bring all of us together in order to collectively ensure that we influence this decade of action. And thank you to Global Optimism and all the amazing work, Christiana, that you and Tom and so many others are doing to ensure that we do continue to be optimists as we move through this decade of action.
Thank you very much. And with 1 minute to spare for a good transition to the next wonderful panel, thank you to all of you. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your words of encouragement and your words of emergency to remember. We are nature. Together with nature, we shall get out of this. Thank you very much, and over to the organizers.
Thank you, Christiana. Thank you, everyone. Lucy, over to you.